Today I have come to Warwick in central England. This town has got an incredible and long history, much of which is still available in the architecture and the places that you can come and visit. I'm beginning my day at Warwick Castle, where I'm meeting local historian Aaron Manning. Aaron is also one of the organisers of the upcoming Warwick Words Festival, where I will be as the festival's official podcaster. My name is Philippa Lacey and this is the British History Channel. Aaron, thank you for joining me today. We're in Warwick Castle. It's an incredibly large fortress for a town, for a start. How long has there been a castle here? What's the origins of it?
Yeah, well, it's old. It's one of the oldest castles in England. The first castle in Warwick was actually built by William the Conqueror. So you're talking, right at the cusp of castle building in England. The date that's given is 1068.
Oh, so
really, really early on. And this is when William is, I like to call it the second Norman conquest. He's kind of subdued the south, he's got control of London, he's kicked the Godwinsons out, and then he's moving into the Midlands to deal with the brothers, the Earl of Mercia and his brother, the Earl of Northumbria. And so he's kind of building a castle in what was a very old borough by that point, Warwick, a kind of administrative centre, a place of defence for the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms that came before it. But the castle is a statement of domination, of control, of Norman subjugation of the local population. So right in the heart of the town, what you probably get a sense of when you come to Warwick is that we're actually up on a cliff at the moment. We're right on top of a cliff. So the castle's built right on top of this cliff. It's a statement that the Normans are here. And from that point for the next, I would say at least 600 years, the castle is that presence, that fortified place that symbolises the feudal system, the power of the nobles, and ultimately the king.
So is it straight off like one of the wooden castles and then it's replaced by stone?
I think it's probably a wooden castle because it was built so quickly. And this is, as William's moving up the country, he's going north, he's building one really quickly. And in fact, when you come to Warwick today, all that really remains, I think, of that early castle are the earthworks. So the big mound of the Motte and Bailey Castle, the ditch that's dug around the castle. The castle you actually see today is from the 14th century. So the great palatial castle, you see these amazing towers, the rampart walls, the huge fortifications. This is the high point of the House of Warwick that lived here. This is the real power, the strength, the domination. The Earls of Warwick are usually bit part characters in most stories, most books you write, right? I mean, they're kind of there in the background. They're mentioned.
Yes, mentioned.
They're mentioned, right? But actually, they are so important, and they are, I think, the kings of the Midlands. They have such control of the region from Worcester to Northamptonshire, from Leicestershire down to Gloucestershire.
Because we're on a very strategic point here, aren't we?
That's right.
In the middle of the Midlands, really.
Yeah, they're the heart of England. I mean, it's literally the heart of England. And the great Roman roads pass through here, the Watling Street and the Fossway. They kind of intersect not far from here. And so Warwick Castle has a really important part to play, not only in the kind of military life of England, the armies that are kind of going up to Scotland, west to Wales or down into France, they're passing through Warwickshire, and so the House of Warwick plays a key part in that. But also trade, also networks, also connections, people moving around the country. And so throughout the Middle Ages and throughout the medieval period, you can't really go anywhere without the Earls of Warwick being involved in some way or somehow. And the castle is the symbol really of their might, their strength and their magnificence.
Okay, so let's talk about them, since this clearly is a very significant place and these are very significant people who lived here. Give me some notable events linked to the castle and the people here.
The House of Warwick has lots of kind of big players. I think probably the one that most people listening to this will have heard of is Warwick the Kingmaker, right? So he's the kind of the epitome, the symbol, the kind of the high point of the House of Warwick, where all of the power, all of the strength kind of came and became one, and he was able to topple kings and unite. But I find him a bit dull, actually, because he actually doesn't spend much time in Warwick, of course. He's in London, he's in the north, he's playing a key role, and he is inheriting a vast established power. It's the House of Warwick that made the Kingmaker rather than the Kingmaker Warwick, if you like. So I'm going to give you two. There are two that I think are my favourites. I always think a really great metric for being a a really super cool medieval figure is having a nickname given to you in your lifetime. And there are two that are my favourite. They're father and son. One is the Black Dog. And this is Guy Beauchamp, the Earl of Warwick, in the reign of Edward II. He is the great arch nemesis of Edward II. I think pretty much because he thinks Edward is a bit of a useless king. You know, he was a friend of Edward I. He thought martial strength was what kingship should be about. He didn't like all the foppery and the fabulousness of Edward II. And particularly Edward II's favourite, Piers Gaveston. You know, this low-born Gascon knight becomes his favourite, becomes an Earl of Cornwall. And the Earl of Warwick's furious because, you know, he's all about protocol, he's all about seriousness, all about kind of established power. And it's actually not actually far from where we are now in the castle, actually, in these buildings. You know, the Earl of Warwick, the Black Dog, who was nicknamed the Black Dog by Piers Gaveston, he drags this royal favourite to Warwick, he captures him, he brings him into the area we are now, which is probably near what the original Great Hall was, puts him on trial for treason, and then has him executed not far from Warwick. So you've got this a really massive and important execution happening right here in Warwick. So really cool, really macabre, and really interesting. My other favourite one is his son, and his son inherits in a time of strife. Edward II, you know, obviously he's very unhappy that Gaveston has been executed. He eventually kind of brings his tyranny and his vengefulness on Warwick, and so his son Thomas Beauchamp grows up under the mire. But he then lives through the reign of Edward III, and Edward III, of course, renowned as this kind of warrior king. He kind of starts the war that we know as the 100 Years' War, and the Earl of Warwick becomes one of his great war captains, his great knights, and so he's there at the front line at the Battle of Crecy. He's actually the tutor, the mentor of the Black Prince during that battle. So the Black Prince kind of has all these great achievements. It's the Earl of Warwick who's kind of just behind him, kind of pushing him ahead. He's there at the Battle of Poitiers. There's a brilliant description actually in one of the chronicles that describes the Earl of Warwick being like a lion at Poitiers, and that apparently a bit like the scene in Lord of the Rings between Gimli and Legolas, the Earl of Warwick is said to have had a competition with the Earl of Salisbury about which of them could kill more Frenchmen. And so they're kind of competing on the battlefield, seeing who can spill more drafts of French blood. And in fact, by the end of his kind of life, his kind of period of fighting in France, one of the chronicles says that the French actually described the Earl of Warwick as the devil Warwick. And on one occasion in 1369, the Earl of Warwick's crossing over, and it said that when his banners were seen on the hill, the French actually scarpered, they ran away because, you know, such was the reputation of the devil Warwick. So pretty glorious, pretty macabre, but, you know, if you get a nickname like that, you know, they're pretty cool.
Yeah, he did his job well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the terror of the French, you know, an English hero.
Yeah. I'm just imagining now someone having like a tally board behind them.
Yeah, exactly. Who's keeping score?
How do they keep? I definitely got one more than you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that only counts as one.
Yeah. So, who else are we following in the footsteps of when we visit Warwick Castle, especially? Yeah,
so when you come to Warwick today, the kind of great glories, the magnificence of that medieval house kind of survives when you're kind of outdoors, when you see the kind of remains, the skeletal remains of the castle, the great fortifications, the magnificent towers, some of the architecture and the kind of brickwork. But Warwick Castle outlives them, it survives them, and there are two particular important families in that. And so the later one is the Greville family. So they kind of inherit Warwick Castle in 1604, and they live here right through to the 1970s. And Warwick Castle is kind of transformed. There's a great poem actually that was written in 1615 by a visiting deacon, and he describes Warwick Castle as being as if a lover built and a soldier kept it, which I think is a really nice way of describing Warwick when you come here, because you have the strength of the fortifications, but then you have the art and the beauty of the interiors and the collection. And, you know, where we're standing right now is part of this country house that developed in the kind of 17th through to the 19th century. And there's a magnificent collection of art, beautiful interiors, and some really interesting personal stories about that family. Although by that point, really, as kind of national players, as significant important people, it kind of really declines. But there's another family that are particularly important, not just to the castle, but also to Warwick itself, and that's the Dudleys. And so the Dudleys kind of own Warwick Castle from 1547 to 90, so right in the heart of the Tudor period, it's the reign of Elizabeth I, it's kind of Gloriana, it's the kind of English Renaissance. And the Dudleys are great players. You know, I'm sure anyone who knows of Tudor history knows the Dudleys. They're great players at the Elizabethan court, great politicians. Robert Dudley, maybe even the lover of Elizabeth I. But to justify their position, to justify their strength, their political power, their influence, they needed a legacy story. They needed an origin story. And so they find this kind of ancestral web that links them back to the medieval House of Warwick. And so they end up adopting the titles. They become the Earls of Warwick and the Earls of Leicester, which were two kind of local titles. They take control of Warwick Castle. They take control of Kenilworth Castle down the road. They become their great citadels of power. And really they use the name of Warwick and the associations of Warwick, the heraldry of Warwick, you know, the bear and ragged staff, for example, as symbols to justify their power. So every time you come to Warwick Castle, if you go into Warwick Town, their legacy is everywhere because they are almost kind of vomiting kind of heraldry and glory and ancestry onto the town as if to justify their position and power.
I see. So sort of creating the backstory almost.
Exactly, yeah. Manifesting it physically that they are the inheritors of this great legacy of the Black Dog, the Devil Warwick, and whoever else came before them.
People have heard of the Dudley family, probably mainly, obviously, Robert Dudley,
Yes.
as you say. Now, but he was never Earl of Warwick.
That's right.
Was he?
No.
So explain the family sort of structure. Who was actually here, and what was Robert doing in the town as well? Because he's significant in the town.
He is, yeah. So Robert was the younger brother. So he had an older brother, Ambrose. He was the one who became the Earl of Warwick. And that title had already been inherited by their father, John Dudley, who's better known as the Duke of Northumberland. He gets the kind of more senior dukedom when he is the guardian of Edward VI. So he's this kind of, depending on your point of view, he's either the great kind of Protestant hero or he's the villain who tries to put Lady Jane Grey on the throne instead of Mary I. So yeah, he's a hero or villain depending on your point of view. And then his sons then kind of inherit that same attitude, that same want to kind of be big players. Ambrose Dudley is the oldest, so he gets the more senior title, which is the Earldom of Warwick. And then Robert Dudley needs to get a title as well, and he adopts the Earldom of Leicester. And that's quite important, I think, because the reason why I think he chooses the Leicester Earldom, and he does choose it, you know, he's given a kind of a range of titles he can have, and he chose the Earldom of Leicester.
I didn't realise that.
It's because the very first Earl of Warwick there was Henry de Beaumont. He's the kind of just after the Norman Conquest. His older brother, Robert, was the Earl of Leicester. So you've got the very first Norman conquerors of the West Midlands being the Earl of Warwick and the Earl of Leicester. And so by Robert taking the Earldom of Leicester and his older brother having the Earldom of Warwick, they're almost kind of recreating, imitating this heraldry, this ancestry that goes all the way back to the Norman Conquest. And it made them enemies locally. So one of the great families in Warwickshire were the Arden family, who could genuinely trace their ancestry back to before the Norman Conquest. There are Ardens in Warwickshire, you know, that go back to the Kingdom of Mercia. And one of the Ardens during the 1580s was so furious that the Dudleys were kind of pretending to be this great ancestral family from Warwickshire. There was a kind of great tit-for-tat rivalry between them over heraldry and pedigrees and in court battles over land. And unfortunately, the head of the Arden family ends up being executed because he's involved in a Catholic conspiracy. Or was he? Because I think one of the judges in that was Robert Dudley, and there's some suggestion that maybe Dudley was getting rid of his rival. But ultimately, Ambrose is the one that owns Warwick Castle here because he's the Earl of Warwick. But I don't think Ambrose is that interested in the story and the legacy and their ancestry. He's kind of more about guns and ordnance and the Tower of London and being, you know, in the Navy.
Isn't he, Ambrose?
Yeah,
he get injured quite badly?
He does, yeah. He gets a really bad thigh wound. It's actually what kills him in the end because it gets infected. He has to have an amputation, and the complications of that kill him. But yeah, he's all about war. He's all about fighting. He's all about ordnance and surveys and that kind of thing. But it's Robert Dudley who is maybe is the younger brother. I don't know, but he's all about kind of reading and history and legacy. And in letters that he writes to other courtiers, he talks about kind of planting himself in the county. You know, this is my house. I am of the House of Warwick, and I mean to plant myself in Warwickshire. And so renovating and restoring Kenilworth Castle, which had been a royal fortress, for much of the medieval period, and kind of encouraging his brother to do work at Warwick Castle as well. But also Robert is the driver behind much of the control and seizing authority of the town, the borough of Warwick as well, because to recreate yourself, to imitate the old medieval Earls of Warwick, you kind of need the power that goes with that, and so it's less Ambrose and more Robert who is being the force behind taking control of Warwick and taking control of Kenilworth and influencing Coventry and North and South Warwickshire as well. So although Ambrose is the senior, he's the Earl of Warwick, Robert, the younger brother, he's the one who generally cares about this stuff.
That's so interesting what you say about him being into into learning, into his books, into his script, because that's clearly how he could identify that the earldom of Leicester is the one to have gone for.
Yeah.
I've never even thought about how do they know.
Yeah. That's it. And he had a whole team of genealogists and working for him that produced these pedigrees. Some of the most beautiful pedigrees that survive from the 16th century are from the Dudleys. There's an incredible one that's in the collection at Longleat's house, which is this really kind of beautifully illustrated pedigree of the Dudley family that goes all the way back through to these kind of distant ancestors related to King Arthur, say. And there's this really incredible scene of Guy of Warwick, this kind of local medieval legend of kind of an English hero who kind of defeats dragons and fights giants and so forth. And the Dudley heraldry is kind of interwoven into the Guy of Warwick scene. It is so beautiful. You can see it online if you search Dudley pedigrees. So I definitely do that. And as I said, I think it's what drove Robert. I think particularly because he's getting so much stick at court. I mean, he's got enemies. And the thing they usually beat him with is that he's a nobody. He's a lowborn. He's come from nowhere to suddenly become this, the Queen's favourite. And it sticks. It hurts him. He's really offended by it. So he's doing his utmost, or he's getting his people to, go and find me a source. And, the route he goes is the House of Warwick, because even then it was so well known. It was so established. It was so famous. These historic names, Kingmaker, Devil Warwick, Black Dog, all the way through to the Norman Conquest. It was such a renowned, powerful family. And Warwick Castle had such a mystery, a magic, a magnificence about it that, to associate yourself with that was to uplift yourself in the eyes of the court and of course, the Queen.
Now, he has Kenilworth Castle, which, like you say, is not far from here at all. If anyone's visiting Warwick, it's really
definitely
not far to go, and it's definitely worth it. We're actually, I was trying to work this out, are we 450 years, is it, anniversary of Elizabeth's, it was her fourth and final visit to Robert at Kenilworth Castle, wasn't it? This sort of 19-day stay where he basically proposed his marriage, as far as I understand.
It was the last attempt I think he made.
But he, obviously that was a way he was trying to impress Elizabeth, but I believe Lord Leicester Hospital was another sort of way he was trying to maybe impress her. Do you want to explain what the background to Lord Leicester Hospital is? Because that's another place that if people are visiting Warwick, they really should go and see. Yeah,
it's a medieval gem. I mean, if you go there, it's so evocative. It's so interesting. It's full of Dudley paraphernalia, Dudley legends. So it's definitely worth. If you're interested in the Tudors, if you're interested in the Dudleys, definitely go to Lord Leicester while you're here. Yeah, it's so fascinating. We're actually going to be covering this story during a festival service that's going to be at the church on the 28th of September, because it was all part of as I said, Robert Dudley wanted to kind of evoke the sense of ancestry and legend and manifest it in Warwick town. And there's two ways he did that, and they were both in September 1571. So the first was that he had, as part of his negotiation of a marriage between a French count and Elizabeth I, which of course we know never happened, but at the time, because he was involved in those negotiations, the French king bestowed on Robert Dudley the Order of St. Michael, which was, the highest French chivalric honour you could get. And it's so interesting because what Robert Dudley does is he's given that in France, but then he almost recreates a ceremony in England for him to receive this honour, directly for himself. And he holds that at St Mary's Church in Warwick on the 29th of September 1571, the feast of St Michael. So in the church, again, you can go and visit the church today and go and kind of stand in this place where Robert Dudley would have stood. But he creates this kind of chivalric ceremony where he is bestowed with the Order of St Michael, a French order. And he does it while he's standing beside the tombs of, the medieval earls of Warwick, so the ones who had fought in France. So the Devil Warwick, who's buried in the church, he's sitting beside his tomb. It's near the tomb of Richard Beauchamp, another Earl of Warwick, who also received the Order of St Michael as well. And this ceremony is all about associating himself with the medieval earls. He's bestowed with the French honour just as his ancestors, as he claimed, had fought against the French and been bestowed. What was really interesting is that he came to the town in a big cavalcade. He arrived with hundreds of men. He had the great nobles around him, and he expected to be treated like a prince, like a king. So the burgesses of the town would meet him on the road. There'd be big fanfare. People would flood the streets, and there'd be great cheering and potpourri, whatever, thrown into the air. It'd be a wild celebration. And he arrived at the town, and there was no one to meet him. And there was no one in the roads, no one in the streets. It was empty. It was just people going about their daily life. And the reason is the burgesses, we know all this because there's a surviving account book from the local corporation. And the burgesses had met, and they'd effectively said that kind of arrival, the kind of arrival of where you go out and meet somebody and there's a big fanfare, should only really be for a king or a queen. And Robert Dudley, he's important, but I mean, he's not a queen, he's not a king, so as much as he'd like to be. So we probably won't. We'll just meet him in the town. So we'll wait for him, wait outside our Guildhall, and we'll meet him there. Well, Robert Dudley was furious. I mean, he was absolutely furious, and he's actually sent his servants in to berate the burgesses. So they're shouting at each other, they're having an argument in the town, in the streets, and Robert Dudley goes, and he was going to stay in the town at the Guildhall. He actually stays at a priory house just outside the town. So he's furious, the town are embarrassed, they've made a big faux pas, and Dudley is effectively threatening to kind of pull all of his resources to punish them and to oust them and to put his own men into the corporation to run the town. And so these burgesses, they're so embarrassed, they really need to protect their livelihoods, their living. They think, what can we do? What can we do to get Robert Dudley back on side and have his patronage for the town? So the old Guildhall, the medieval Guildhall, the kind of buildings that had been part of the old organisation that ran town affairs, the corporation in Warwick from the kind of 1540s to the 1570s, that they're almost council buildings, if you like, for the corporation. They effectively say, well, why don't we give them to Robert Dudley? Why don't we make a generous grant to Dudley as an offering to kind of win his patronage, that we will give him these buildings for him to do as he likes. He can set up a house, he can do charitable work, he can do anything he wants with them. And that's exactly what happens. So these buildings kind of end up in Leicester's hands as almost like a bribe from the town, as a way of apologising because they hadn't treated him as a king. And Dudley, in a kind of chivalric statement of his chivalry, of his grandeur, of his glory, of his Christianity, he converts them into a hospital. So he offers them for injured soldiers that had been injured in the Protestant wars against the forces of Catholic Spain, that they would become a residence for injured and maimed soldiers. And so it becomes Lord Leicester's hospital. And he has a big influence in that, in how it's structured, in how it's organised. He puts very kind of radical Calvinist and in the end Puritan preachers in there. So he's also trying to influence the kind of religious makeup of the town through that organisation. But it becomes the great symbol of the Dudleys' control and dominance of local affairs in Warwick. And ultimately it's just a way of kind of bribing the Dudleys to kind of get them on side. But interestingly, when you go there today, all the guides that you meet are former soldiers. So it's still used as almost like a hospital, if you like, for soldiers who serve in the war. Just like you have the Beefeaters at the Tower of London, you've got the brethren of the Lord Leicester Hospital who live there and can guide you round, and they've got some really interesting stories to tell too.
It's a fascinating building, but it's also in a fascinating location,
yes,
isn't it? Because it's right next to one of the medieval gates.
Yes.
Which now the road skirts around.
Yeah. So there's part of the fortifications are still there. You can still see that the gate itself is still really strong and powerful, and and it's no coincidence that the buildings are there, because the Guildhall is part of the kind of corporation kind of controlling who's coming in and out of the town. They're collecting tolls. They're looking at ne'er-do-wells who are coming in and out, and then it becomes Dudley's Hospital. So you have this really wonderful survival of kind of part of medieval Warwick, because much of the rest of the town you'll see is modernised. It's built in brick, and that's because there was a huge fire that kind of erupted in Warwick in 1694. So much of the medieval buildings that had been part of that high pavement that ran through the centre of Warwick were gutted. They were burned down in the late 17th century. So you have today, when you come, a very gentrified, 18th century enlightened brick town with its kind of beautiful classical details. But that's a real gem. It's a real surviving gem to give you an idea, a flavour of what medieval Warwick is around. The great towers, the great gates, the stone walls that would have once gone around the whole of Warwick, and then these kind of wonderful timber wattle and door buildings as well. It's wonderful to go to. There's so much kind of layers of history in Warwick that you can see when you come.
There is. And there's a church above that gate.
Throughout the medieval period, you probably would have had churches on top of gates. It was quite a typical thing. So you have on the two gates that survive in Warwick, the East Gate and the West Gate, there were chapels that were built above them. And usually they were kind of dedicated to saints that would have had particular spiritual importance to the town. So the chapel that's above the West Gate is the Chapel of St. James. James, one of the fishermen that became a disciple of Jesus of Nazareth. The town is, of course, right next to the Avon. So the livelihood of the river was so important to the town that you would have prayed to the fisherman James for salvation. So these kind of important chapels that kind of dotted around the town have a really important spiritual place. But of course, what's really interesting about Warwick is that those kind of Catholic associations still survive through today. They're kind of, the echoes are still there. But one of the great ruptures in Warwick Town's history was the English Civil War. The Warwick Falls, the castle, so where we're standing right now, was under Puritan control. So there was a real kind of, and it was one of those kind of really extreme, really zealous, really kind of self-important kind of garrisons that would have been in Warwick. And so you have effectively a town under occupation. And what that means is that you have all these kind of nonconformist sects, religious and Protestant kind of extreme sects, are allowed to thrive because there's so many soldiers in Warwick. There's so many. There's a lot of tolerance for kind of different views by the garrison, which there wouldn't have been before. They're these kind of small sects. And in fact, the main festival is held in a Baptist church, and that Baptist church has its origins back to the Civil War, when Baptists and Quakers and Independents and Fifth Monarchists, they all kind of thrived in Warwick. It was a town under occupation, and pretty miserable, I'm sure, for the people who lived here.
Yeah. You mentioned the festival there. You're one of the organisers of Warwick Words Festival. It's held annually in sort of end of September, early October.
That's correct, yeah.
So we're here in the August of 2025. So you're about to...
That's right.
I'll be back for the festival at the end of September. So what can people expect at the festival?
Well, it's going to be so much fun. We've got 7 days of brilliant events, actually. What's so fun about our events this year, we've got a handful of talks, probably about 5 to 6 talks every single day on a range of subjects. I mean, it's such a diverse festival this year. It's so exciting to have so many different subjects, pirates, gladiators, we've got Mercy and Kings, we've got sex from the Victorian era, Renaissance medicine, all those kind of things. So really, really great lineup of talks. But there's a really great chance to join local experts and local specialists as well. So we've got ghost tours here at Warwick Castle, which is going to be super, super scary, super fun. You get to come into the castle at night on your own, super exclusive. We've got walking tours of the town. We've got a history quiz over beer, over wine as well. So that's going to be fun. Yeah, definitely get down for that. And we've got some live performance as well. So there's a celebration of Warwick Courthouse, which is 300 years old this year. There's going to be a live performance which celebrates the history of the town from that period. And a wonderful performance by the researcher, historian and performer Leslie Smith. portraying Boudica as well. So that's going to be super, super fun. So there's so much to do. You can check the programme at warwickwords.co.uk, because what I will tell you, we're here in mid-August right now. Events are already selling out, you know, and I know most people say that about festivals, but in this case, it genuinely is true. So, you know, it's get booking now, because it's going to be real fun.
Wonderful. Where can people get information?
So you can go to warwickwords.co.uk. You can download the full programme there. You can also book tickets from that website. You can also follow us on Instagram and X, so at Warwick Words, or you can follow me, the Warwick Historian, as well. I'll be kind of keeping us updated. And of course, British History Tours as well. So It's going to be real fun.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Aaron.
Thank you.